Roundtable on Poverty. Today we have with us Professor Garth Magnum, the Professor of Economics and Management at the University of Utah, Shirley Weathers, Research Director at Utah Issues, which is a nonprofit low-income advocacy organization, Scott Lazarus, PhD candidate in economics at the University of Utah, who has written his doctoral dissertation on poverty in Utah. Today we'd like to begin, we're going to explore mostly the poverty situation in Utah. In 1990, the census reported a national poverty rate of 13.1%. Utah had a poverty rate at the same time of 11.4%. By 1994, the national poverty rate rose to 14.5%. However, Utah's poverty rate fell to an estimated 9.6%. And I'd like to ask Professor Magnum, why has the poverty rate in Utah fallen while that of the nation as a whole has increased?
Well, Utah's had a very prosperous economy during the 90s, but there are a number of other factors relating to Utah's population. One is that we have far fewer single-headed families, and we also have a higher proportion of two-earner families. Our families stay together and then they work together, you might say. And then Utah's population is very homogeneous. We have a smaller proportion of ethnic and racial minorities in the state. So all of those things together make things good for Utah. We still have, of course, we estimate about 188,000 people who are poor. And of course, the fact that they're smaller in proportions than the rest of the country doesn't make it any hurt any less for them, but it does make it more manageable for Utah.
Now, when you say people are poor, how do we define that? I mean, is there a definition or criteria?
Yes, the federal government has a criteria that's really based on the cost of food. Because over time, the surveys have shown that a low-income family spends about a third of its income on food. They just go out into the supermarkets and price a basket of food and 3 times that, and that becomes the poverty rate, varied by family size. But that creates a problem, because in recent years, food prices have gone up less rapidly than housing and some other costs, particularly in Utah. So that actually one could get worse off without showing up in the poverty statistics simply because of the high costs of housing.
Okay. Well, who are the poor in Utah? And can you give me some typical profiles of who is poor in Utah? Shirley?
Well, I'd say there are about 188,000 different stories of people who are poor in Utah, which is the number of people that Garth just mentioned as being poor. But there do tend to be some high-risk factors, and individuals and families can combine or experience a whole handful of those. So there's quite an array. It's hard to say what a typical low-income person is. There's a very high risk of poverty associated with being a person of color or a family of color. There's a high risk associated with being a single parent, a single wage earner. That's compounded if you're a woman, which most single parents are, because of the low earning power. There are, two-parent intact families who are poor, and then there are single individuals who are poor who also can explain their poverty if we were to ask them in a number of different ways.
And this gets to a very interesting question, why people are poor. And I noticed that, Scott, in your work, you gave me this quote about the determination and the underlying causes of poverty may be subjective. Can you talk a bit about that example?
Well, it's subjective because it depends on your point of view. Different people tend to look for different things, and what you really have is just a strongly interrelated set of causes and it becomes hard to separate out individual causes. So if someone, say you have a family that is below the poverty threshold, someone might say that they're poor because or let's just say that only the father is working. Some people would say
a married father with
with children. Yeah. Some people would say that the family's poor because the father doesn't have a high enough wage level. Some people would say that he has to take responsibility because he didn't work hard enough or didn't go to school for long enough. Others would say, well, why doesn't the wife go to work? That they're poor because the wife wants to stay home with the children. Other people think the wife should stay home with the children. So,
or should they have had children?
Or why did they make the choice to have children when they don't have a high capacity to earn wages? So it depends on your point of view, and there's a lot of political debates about this issue ongoing.
Okay, in this issue of why are people poor, I have one of your quotes, and Garth, I'd like you to make a comment on this. So you wrote, in regard to the poor population as a whole, the institutional or economic factors explain how much poverty exists, while the personal factors explain why it is that particular individuals and households are its victims. Can you explain what you mean by this?
All right, well, the primary cause of poverty in Utah is a low wage level. The average worker in Utah who has no more than 1 year of post-secondary training gets a wage of $7.60. If that person is employed full-time, full year, and is the only earner in that family, if it has a husband and wife and 2 children, just makes it to the poverty line.
That's about $14,000
that's
so a year.
roughly $15,000
$15,000
a year for a family of 4. Well, once again, then, is it because there's only one earner in the family? The economy says this is our wage structure. Who will be poor within that wage structure? It will be the family that only has one wage earner. So the personal characteristic of the family is how come not 2, as Scott just said. One of the reasons that Utahns stay out of poverty is we have one of the highest proportions in the country of 2-earner families. The labor force participation rate for women in Utah is one of the largest in the United States. So with a low wage structure, we stay out of poverty only by having 2 earners, which means that in most cases, both the husband and wife are earning. And if you don't have a husband and wife in the family, then it's awfully hard to avoid being poor.
So this idea of structure causing poverty, you're saying, I mean, in the United States, the trends over the past 15 or 20 years is that the wages of high school educated workers or less have been declining, and those of college-educated workers have been increasing slightly.
In fact, Mary, only those of people with postgraduate degrees have been increasing.
Okay.
Just plain bachelor's
Well, in
degree
fact,
won't
this
cut
is
it
what,
anymore. Okay.
I had realized this, but I was hoping that they were going up a bit. But this idea of structural poverty would mean that even if we all 4 of us went to college, there may be only 2 college-educated jobs that pay good wages, and the rest of us will be stuck in poverty. And I wonder about this because there's increasing emphasis on education as a way to get access to those high-wage jobs. But if the structure of the economy is causing poverty, if we all get educated, will that eliminate poverty?
That remains to be be seen. With the structure as it exists right now, it would mean that a lot of well-educated people would be getting poverty wages. But as people get educated, the industries that absorb those or highly educated people may advance, such as software industries. We may be able to create more high-wage jobs. If the economy were static, that wouldn't happen.
I would add to that, though, even though that's all true, I think that one of the biggest public policy debates right now that really focuses in on this is centered around whether the best thing to do with poor people is to get them into jobs. Garth has just explained that that isn't necessarily a way to get out of poverty. In fact, a whole lot of people who are poor and desperately poor are working.
Yes,
They're just
in
not
fact,
making
I think
it.
we have to remember that.
Right. But the other side of that question is, should we instead do the best we can to get people additional training beyond the post-secondary level and try to target that training towards jobs that do exist, or jobs that we could partner with economic developers such that they would exist for folks. In other words, what part can the entire community play in trying to, kind of up the ante in terms of helping people get on their feet? Because I guess there's a question of people being poor, and then there's a second question that we would ask, and that is, what do we do about it?
And are there, do we have separate policies? For example, one of the issues in the United States has been the feminization of poverty. So women who are taking or rearing children by themselves, do they present special issues to deal with? For example, because if that woman does work, what about her children? Or is that?
I would say there are all kinds of approaches that we could positively take to those issues. One of the things that's the most interesting about single-parent poverty is that they have kids, and there's only one of them.
Is this on the rise in Utah, or is it single-parent poverty?
It's on the rise.
It's on the
It's
rise?
on the rise everywhere.
It follows the trend of the country, but it's below, a little bit below the average for the
And
United
what is
States.
causing that? Is it women not marrying, women getting divorced? I mean, what is leading to that rise in single-parent?
All of the above.
Yeah.
All of the above.
Yeah.
And this gets us then to this question, because when we talk about women in poverty and children, there's the big debate surrounding AFDC. And AFDC is Aid to Family with Dependent Children. It's a poverty program designed to assist women with children. And often this type of program is characterized as increasing dependency and reducing self-reliance. Does it do that? And if so, are there other ways to address issues of women and children in poverty?
Well, Shirley's the state's expert on that
Okay.
issue.
Well, not really, but in our view, the issue of increasing dependency is not the problem whatsoever. The problem
Doesn't
is,
it lead to more babies? Because if I get $100, if I have another baby, do I have another baby? Is that true or not? That's what we hear.
If you would have a baby and feed it for a year for $100, I'd have some doubt about your economic sensitivities.
So that's just thrown out as part of highlighting this idea of
The
dependency?
actual studies that have been done, the economic studies, have not been able to find a correlation between out-of-wedlock births and welfare. And they've tried.
So single parent is families is not because single women are having more children, but that they're not getting married, or
They're actually having less children as time goes by. It's a deeper problem within the whole society. It's more than just a poverty problem. There's a change in, increase in divorce rates, increase in out-of-wedlock births, which impacts the poverty population a lot more strongly than the non-poverty. But it's not just a poverty problem. It's a bigger problem than that.
and as far as welfare is concerned, I think to say up front, there are a whole lot of myths like that one that are driving the discussion.
what are some of these myths?
Well, that's one of them, that women on welfare have more children in order to get more money, and so we're rewarding having out-of-wedlock births and increasing the size of welfare families. As Scott said, actually welfare families across the nation in Utah are a little bit smaller on the average than in the general population. That's a myth. There are facts to back it up, but it persists because, and I would say it's a part of a political discussion more than it is a factual investigation aimed at developing good public policy. There are myths that women on welfare they're not like the rest of us in that they want to just sit there on welfare. They don't want to get themselves off. They have no motivation. They're irresponsible. They don't care to parent their children. All those kinds of myths surround the discussion. And they are indeed myths that we probably don't have time to go through and nail facts to correct the misperceptions. But the solutions that are being posed around welfare reform, what should we do to fix the system, really we think miss the point. What we need to do is just that, fix the welfare system, which has been designed to support only the poorest single-parent families on welfare And what that has done through a variety of regulations, which is what programs run by, is to put in place barriers to getting off when you begin to earn more income, for example, and begin to move forward to get yourself out of the situation. Your benefits decline in too quick of a manner such that a cliff is created. And families that are that poor are very vulnerable. The slightest change in their circumstance, the slightest illness, a child care problem, everybody has those that has kids, those kinds of things throw them back on the system. And Utah is one of the few states that's recognized.
Is there a high turnover in welfare recipiency in terms of the duration in which people are on it? Are people on it 1 or 2 years and then they get off and back on, or is it characterized by people on it year after year after year? Do you know
That's
that?
another of those all of the above answers, because you do have a strata of people who are long-term, and then you have a very high turnover above that.
Because I know for the United States as a whole, it's approximately 70% of people are poor within a 10-year span for only 1 or 2 years.
That is true. So you have maybe that 30% that's that solid strata, and that 70% that's a high turnover population in and out of poverty, depending upon the family status, a divorce, another child, loss of a job, illness, whatever the case may be.
Okay, I wanted to change the discussion for a minute to look at children in poverty. And the national poverty rate for children under 18 in the United States is approximately 20%, meaning 1 in 5 children are in poverty. And what's interesting when you put this in context, the next closest rate for an industrialized nation, which is Canada, is 9%, or 1 in 10. When you look at the European countries, poverty rates of children typically fall below 7%, often down to 3 or 4%. And what accounts for this difference? I mean, the U.S. is, after all, the wealthiest nation in the world, yet we have 1 in 5 of our children in poverty. And Scott, perhaps you can start if you
I'm not sure I can make those comparisons with the other countries because I'm not so familiar with the policies, but I would assume that it is because of social policies, government policies, more than anything else.
I mean, do they care for their children more than we do? Is that
child allowances? I know most of those countries probably have.
What's a child allowance?
It's just like a government tax credit for each child to make sure that this doesn't happen, that we have 20% of our children in poverty. In the United States, the big, it's related to the single female-headed household situation and the lack of child support collections from the non-custodial parents. So we end up with a higher poverty rate for children than for adults. And actually the lowest poverty rate is for the senior citizens. And the reason for that is also because of government policy, because we have a very strong Social Security system that's indexed to the inflation rate. We don't have anything like that to cover children.
Programs, are they indexed to the inflation rate?
Not at all.
So the importance of this is if the fixed income is indexed to the inflation rate, your purchasing power is maintained over time.
Right, and that doesn't work with child support even for those who collect it. If you need to get a higher amount of child support to keep up with inflation, you have to go back to court. And so one of the policy prescriptions that's been suggested is to have guaranteed child support, which would be similar to an insurance system, where it would be a certain percentage of the non-custodial parent's income, usually the father.
As long as they're working.
As long as they're working, yeah. And then the government would have a minimum that it would kick in if the father wasn't working. That would be a system that could be used in place of welfare.
I think if I could add a little something here, I think what Scott has alluded to, and you too, in terms of Social Security, is I really think that proves that we can do what we set about to do in terms of public policy. What we have to do is determine that for example, reducing poverty among seniors is important enough to us that we do it. We can do the same with children, but we have fallen short in this country of determining that we're going to direct and target our public policy around poverty to reducing child poverty, we seem to get all balled up with the issue of, well, then we'll make their mothers dependent. And with those two choices, I would choose reducing child poverty, and that would mean I would put resources into assisting the generally single female head of household to get out of poverty while supporting and maintaining the children out of poverty through government programs.
Well, you've got to remember that us 70-year-olds are increasing in number, and we know how to vote.
Yes.
These folks are the ones who don't vote. Kids don't vote.
We should
by
lower the
definition.
voting law, the voting age, right?
But it is very much of a political discussion.
No, in fact, I had the statistic on Social Security programs, because often we seem these days to be ready to bash any program by the government, and yet I found that if you look at the poverty rate for the elderly without government transfer payments, such as Social Security, it would be about 50%. So half of the elderly would be in poverty, and with government transfer programs, that rate falls to about 12%. So that's what you were referring to as the effectiveness of a program.
Yeah, and I think a part of the discussion that is again valued is what is it worth to all of us to reduce poverty among a particular population. Again, we determined that we didn't want the Social Security age population to be poor, our seniors to be poor, but it's...
Well, the fact that we have this high child poverty rate, so the 20%, when a child is in poverty, what kind of outcomes are predicted for them versus a child that grows up in a two-income earning home or two-parent home? What kind of outcomes are different? Does anybody?
Well, it's fairly obvious that their health will suffer, their education will suffer, their acculturation to the society at large will suffer. Many of them will make it, but the handicaps will be such that a high proportion will not, and so there will be this intergenerational cycle of poverty for many of them. They'll end up right back where they started from.
Does this have anything to say about our future labor force? Because as this cohort, if this 20% continues, this cohort eventually becomes a substantial amount of our labor force. Is there?
Sure, it's a cycle.
Excuse me, go ahead.
People who grow up poor are more likely to be poor when they're adults, and then their children will be poor. The worst problem is for the poor children who live in areas where most of the people are poor. You know, there are poor people living everywhere, or almost everywhere. But there's a certain minority of the poor that live in these neighborhoods where all they see are other poor people. They don't have role models. And those are that's one of the biggest problems to target, because that's where a lot of the perpetuation of the cycle goes on. They don't see opportunities, even though we say that everyone has these opportunities, and they do to a degree, but they don't see them. They don't know how to take advantage of them. They don't see anyone else doing it. They don't have contacts for jobs, for example. That's a big problem. So the cycle continues.
But don't we have a rags to riches economy, the Horatio Alger story, that it doesn't matter where you start, the opportunities are there and you can get them if you want? Is that true or not?
Horatio Alger was always one in a million. Most of us will end up very much where we began, depending upon the kind of family that nurtured us and where we started out.
Yeah, when we consider what kids need, both psychologically, emotionally, and materially, in order to develop the kinds of things that we would like to make sure that our kids have, then you begin to imagine how could it be that somebody could get through all of that and become an adult, because what you are as an adult is a composite of what's happened to you all along the way. And if you lack proper nutrition, even during the prenatal period, and your family life is stressful, and both of your parents work, or you have a single parent, and that parent is gone and stressed out trying to be all things to all people, you begin to question the logic. Although I did hear a legislator say the other day that children who grow up in poverty become very strong adults. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's a real handicapping.
Do you think people are aware that 20% of Americans' children are in poverty? And what is the rate in Utah?
Well, the rate in Utah, interestingly, from age 6 to 18 is less than the national average. For those under 6 years of age, it's exactly at the national average. Maybe that's because we typically have a younger population in this state. But so we're just not all that different. And in fact, between the last two censuses, the poverty rate of Utah's children went up more rapidly than it did for the nation as a whole to bring us where we are now.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. It was very interesting.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, and thank you for watching.